Bienvenidos a un capítulo más de Diálogos Sensoriales. En esta ocasión estoy más nervioso de lo normal. Tengo el enorme placer de entrevistar, yo creo que a una de las personas más influyentes de quienes nos dedicamos a sensorial y bueno, quienes en alguna ocasión revisamos un artículo de consumidores en el 2001. Entonces, quisiera darle la bienvenida sin mayor preámbulo a el doctor Jean-Xavier Guinard. Doctor, thank you so much for being here, for accepting this interview, and welcome to Diálogos Sensoriales.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. So let's start this conversation with a simple question. Uh, when and why did you arrive into the sensory field?
So I was studying food and ag engineering back in France, and then I met somebody by the name of Joseph Osenlop, who was a professor there. And I heard he was doing sensory work, and that sounded very cool. And after that, he connected me with two other researchers, Patrick MacLeod and Annick Forion, and that turned into the equivalent of a master's degree in sensory physiology, where I did taste psychophysics at the time.
Nice.
And so that was my first foray into sensory science, and I enjoyed it very much. And so at some point, I told them, I'd really like to go to the U.S. To further my studies, to go to graduate school. And then they said, well, you should probably go to Davis and work with Rosemary Pangborn, which I did.
Wow. And how was that experience? Moved from France, Paris, in fact, to this village of Davis. How was that change for you?
It was a culture shock. You can imagine. I mean, Paris is a very big city with plenty to do, and Davis is more rural. But the greatness of Davis was and continues to be the access to so many facilities, to great people, to interdisciplinary research, and then really coming to work with the pioneer in the field. Rosemary Pangborn was a real treat. I like to tell the story that she actually picked me up at the airport, which is not something I would do with my new students now.
Right.
One evening in September, it was very, very warm, and she was kind enough to pick me up, flying from Paris to Sacramento in this case. And then after that, we developed a great relationship. I was her most prolific graduate student. We published 7 papers together.
Oh, wow.
She became, somebody very, very close, and spent many hours sitting in her office talking about everything. At some point, she was a very demanding person, and I had the very poor taste of going sailing with another professor on the day of the exam in the sensory evaluation course. And she didn't appreciate that. And when I came back, there was a note on my desk saying, you can go back to France. So, I went to her office the next day. I cried, and eventually she kept me in, which was great.
Nice. Well, I guess you have a lot of memories with Rosemary. Some of us who didn't meet her hear that she was, like, as a person, a great person, but also as a strict professor, and she was like a very cautious, or she has very caution about the things she was teaching about sensory. It was not just try and that's it. It's like a science, in fact, right?
Yes, I mean, very, very demanding, very rigorous, great ethics. Somebody who exemplified professionalism. That's one word that she would speak very often. How to be professional, and so the training that you received from her and the contents that she put in her teaching, is something that was again breakthrough, pioneering, visionary as well, because she led the field. and also as a woman in science, it was not as a minority, as a Latina woman, was not something very easy. And at the time, sensory evaluation was not quite considered a scientific discipline, and so she was one of those pioneers who did turn it into a full-fledged scientific discipline, and were it not for the work that she did, and a few others at Davis and beyond, of course, we would not be where we are today.
And do you think she was the person who finished you to get this passion for sensory in your case, or it was like more people?
Very much so, because initially I came to Davis just for a couple of years to do a master's in enology, actually, and then I ended up embracing the field, embracing research, and at the time we didn't have a PhD in food science, so when I had to decide what to do next, I actually picked microbiology. So I worked on yeast for a few years, but at the same time I continued to do sensory work. So I often like to say that I postdoced as I was docking, because as soon as I finished my PhD, I got my first faculty position at Penn State in nutrition, where I shifted a little bit the focus, because then I started to look at the sensory determinants of food intake, so the link between sensory and nutrition, which is something that has become a big part of the research that I do until today. So I went from a food science department with Rosemary and Michael Lewis, who was the Berlin professor, to Penn State in nutrition, and then started to look at sensory in a different way.
Right. And you had the opportunity to see how sensory has evolved in all these years. What will be, in your opinion, the most significant change since your very first touch with sensory and nowadays?
So, when we started, we barely had computers, and so and today we're the age of AI. So that's how things have changed. And in terms of the techniques, the central dogma, as it's known, is something that appeared in the 70s, where you could either do sensory evaluation, so analytical work with trained panels, doing discrimination testing or descriptive analysis, or you did consumer testing and focused on whether the consumer liked or disliked the product. Looking at quality assessment was an absolute no-no. It was considered too subjective, and something that I look at differently now. But I think what really evolved was with molecular biology, with genetics. We started very quickly understanding taste perception, smell perception, and so on. So on the sensory science side of things, we understood how things worked. And then on the more applied sensory evaluation and consumer testing front, I would say is the emergence of sensometrics, broadly speaking, the use of statistics, particularly multivariate statistics, to relate the consumer response, how consumers liked foods and drinks, to their sensory properties measured by descriptive analysis or by instrumental measurements. So I think that was really a big development during the late 80s or 90s. After that, we started, we've witnessed a number of trends or topics that become fashionable. After that, we became quite versed into context research. The fact that if you try to understand consumer behavior, you do have to consider the product variables. How does it taste? How expensive is it? And so on. The consumer variables, who's tasting the product, what are your demographics, your psychographics, your usage of the product. And then context, which is everything that's not a product or a consumer variable. And a number of people in the field, Herb Meiselman as the most prominent promoter of that research, started to look at the effect of context on our experience as consumers. Since besides preference mapping context, I would say that we're now focused on the experience. You hear a lot about the experience as opposed to just the product, which I like, because we start expanding the number of variables that we must look at. Mm-hmm. So I see these are key evolutions in the field, and then obviously right now it's the application of AI tools, whether it's Gen AI or machine learning, to understand better and to predict better all these phenomena. First and foremost, what are consumers going to like, and why can we apply AI tools to do this? So this would be my take on key milestones, but there are many others which I'm probably missing. But those are things that sort of shaped my career and my choices when it came to research topics.
Right. And which part of doing sensory analysis is the prefer for you? I mean, in the sense of you are more like a design of the study, or doing the field, or interpreting the data, which or other, which part is the favorite for you?
I mean, I'd say my favorite part is to design the experiments, to formulate a hypothesis and then design the experiment to try to test that hypothesis. And I would say we embark on a lot of projects, and these days, and for a while now, my problem is always to make sure everything gets written up and submitted for publication, which doesn't happen. So, designing the experiments, the thrill of collecting the data, seeing if we were correct or not on the hypothesis, mm-hmm. Then presenting the work, and then finally writing it up is an important piece. But in terms of what I enjoy most, I would say pretty quickly it moved to the consumer research piece, as opposed to traditional descriptive analysis, even though we did our share of developing different methods. And I've come to challenge the need for some of the more traditional discrimination testing or even descriptive analysis. I think we can do a lot with consumers, mm-hmm. Where you can run a consumer test, you can assess liking by the consumer. You can also have them do some descriptive work through CADA. And then if you apply something like a correspondence analysis to CADA selections, you can get a sensory map, which, let me tell you, is more or less the same as the one you would get through very extensive and expensive descriptive analysis. So we're challenging a little bit those assumptions. And the other thing I would say about consumer research that I really enjoy is that we like to use both quantitative and qualitative methods and combining the two. So we will have a consumer come for a central location test and have them go through a scorecard, tell us about liking, jar, what specifically do they like or dislike about the product, and so on. But we also do a lot of focus groups, ethnography, observation-based work, because that's a great complement to the quantitative piece.
Yeah, but well, based on that and that consumer testing and etc., how easy is to communicate that to the companies that requires that information? I mean, nowadays it's more and more, let's say, easy, but at the beginning, I think it was like difficult, or people didn't believe in sensory. How is that changed actually, or not? Has it changed a lot?
I really think it has changed. I mean, for two reasons. First, because sensory and consumer science have evolved as a field, and I will add sensometrics to that, to such a point that it's completely recognized as a valid and needed scientific discipline. If you look at the structure of departments, academic departments, in food science, you've got your 4 pillars. You've got the food chemistry and biochemistry, food microbiology and safety, food engineering and processing, and then you've got sensory and consumer science. And if things are done right, these are fairly even components of the food science enterprise. And then on the company side, whenever you survey consumers to find out what drives their purchasing a product and enjoying a product, it's always going to be taste and price. Right now, health is starting to become a third driver, which is great. But taste and price really determine things first and foremost. What that means is that companies have to pay attention to the sensory profile and how it drives consumer behavior.
Right. Is there any technique or tool that is not actually developed, but we need something like that, or there's something that it will be nice to have?
I mean,
in the sensory field.
It's a nice question. It's a good question, and we do find we have plenty of colleagues that do some excellent work developing new methodologies, and some of them are needed for sure, but I think it's going to happen with AI. I am fortunate to work with colleagues in computer science who are really at the forefront of AI. And so we've been looking to apply those tools to the prediction of sensory properties, to the prediction of consumer liking, to the prediction of expert quality ratings, in the case of coffee and wine, for example. And so that's really going to speed up many processes, particularly in support of new product development. So I think those are the new techniques or new methods that are going to be emerging. The challenge, though, is going to be that if you compare us to other fields, let's say, if you're trying to optimize an extrusion process as you're making snacks, you can use AI to predict the correct level of all the parameters that are going to be needed for that extrusion process. When it comes to consumers, you're looking at multiple targets because you have different preference segments. We don't all like the same thing. You're also looking at changing targets because from literally 1 year to the next, a Gen Z population, for example, is going to like different things. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to be much more difficult to be accurate in those predictions. So I think there's still some margin for us practitioners to be relevant. And I like to talk about the combination of AI, HI, human intelligence, and data, because we also need to collect a lot of data, which we don't have. Maybe a few multinational companies have tons of data, so they can of sensory and consumer data. But we as researchers do have sets of data, but maybe not as much. So we've also been working on that front of collecting a lot of that data so that we can then train those models to help us with those predictions.
Nice. The artificial intelligence will replace sensory at some point, or it's like change combination of let's say skills from, the human perspective and the AI?
I hope not, but there are two ways to answer this. If you look broadly speaking, the experts will tell you that AI can do exactly what human intelligence can do, except better.
Mhm.
So that's a bit sobering. If it's true, then you would say, well, it should apply to sensory and consumer data as well, or measuring and predicting sensory profiles and consumer liking of products. But again, for the reasons I just mentioned, it is multiple targets, it is moving targets, it is changing targets. You also are looking at very different consumers if you're in Mexico or in France or in Korea or in the US. And so it's a more complex problem. So I don't think it's going to replace sensory practices or sensory departments or consumer insights department, but it's definitely going to help them do their work.
So we need to embrace it. So
Well, we don't have much of a choice.
right.
You may or may be a big fan of technology and and embrace it and be an early adopter, or you may be a bit more cautious or concerned or not thrilled about it, but it's here.
Right. Okay. Let's do now a quick round of which one do you prefer, or 2 EFC questions. Please let me know if you prefer red wine or white wine.
Well, I used to prefer red wine, but I've become an avid drinker of white wine because it's really delicious in California. Both the Chardonnay and Sauvignon and the Sauvignon Blanc are very nice, and we live in a pretty warm climate, and so the idea of having a glass of white wine before dinner is always something that I enjoy.
Great. Tetrad testing or triangle test?
Well, I have to say tetrad because these days you're supposed to do tetrad, but I've probably done more triangle tests than tetrad.
Okay. City or forest?
Definitely city. I mean, being in quite a bit of the time, I enjoy the outdoors quite a bit. But I grew up in Paris, and and I have a place in Madrid. So for me, the city is where I feel and I really love the arts even more than science. So being in a big city is always a plus.
Right. Analytical or consumer testing?
Consumer testing.
Crepe or galette?
Galette. That's a very nice question because many people don't really know the difference. And just for your audience, a crepe would be sweet, and then a galette would be savory. And the other day in the Bay Area in San Francisco, I was in a restaurant where there was an option to have a galette, and I said, I'm going to have one because it's really, if it's done right, it's delicious.
Right, yes. With this, I think it's the butter salt, the salt butter. I think it's caramel brulee. No, caramel salé, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Traditional descriptive analysis or rapid methods?
Rapid methods. The reason is I did mention that we now do descriptive work with consumers using CADA, and it works very well. The consumer is quite savvy, and if you give them the right list of terms to choose from, they can discriminate among your products quite readily.
Meat or fish?
Fish.
Quite blind. White wine, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting. It's true that I also drink white wine with fish. We just did quite a bit of research on coffee and food pairing, which was very interesting because we actually had people taste the coffees and the foods at the same time, and some of the pairings were as expected, but we also tried some things that you would never try. and people were intrigued and to some extent receptive. So it's an interesting line of research, the whole the whole food and drink pairing.
Right. Oh. Parametric or non-parametric statistics?
Parametric, simply because I probably know those better than the non-parametric stuff.
Okay. Coffee or espresso?
I mean, I'm in the US, so it's more coffee, but I come from Europe and it's espresso, so I'll pick espresso.
Okay. Preference mapping or PLS?
Preference mapping. We used it a lot. PLS, I mean, I think if we had done more work with instrumental measurements, I mean, right now we are doing a number. We're working on a number of commodities where we do some instrumental measurements as well, for the sake of seeing whether they do a better job to predict liking than descriptive measures. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think we've used preference mapping a lot. So for product optimization purposes, I was first exposed to it. I mean, or really pushed it when I did a stint at Danone as head of consumer research in the 90s. And preference mapping was awesome because it was a tool that came from R&D, but you could put on the lap of the people in marketing, and they embraced it, made it their own. And the reason why it was great, in addition to being a fantastic product optimization tool, was because it got R&D and marketing to work together, which is not easy to do in many companies. So that was, to me, one of the great benefits of preference mapping.
Good, thank you. And I think this is the easy one. Cheese or bread?
Both together.
Okay.
Yeah, French,
I know. Okay, thank you for your answers. Okay, let's move to the.
You need to ask me Real Madrid or Barça, and
I didn't want to do that.
Real Madrid, of course. I hate Barça, and I love.
Yes. We have more people who wants Real Madrid because of Hugo Sanchez, and that's something we care a lot. Also Ronaldo. So yes, I am also I can tend to Real Madrid.
Good, thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's move to the final part of the interview, and this is more about what is coming for sensory analysis in the next years. What do you think will be, or your wish list about what must the sensory community do in the next years?
So there is one line of research that I very briefly hinted to at the beginning of the interview, which was the link between sensory and nutrition. Mm-hmm. This whole idea of healthy, sustainable, and delicious. So we need to design foods, drinks, menus, diets that are healthy, sustainable, and delicious. So we're doing a lot of work with chefs and with entities like the Culinary Institute of America, or even we've had collaboration with the Basque Culinary Center. And the idea there is to work on all three pieces: healthy for people, for planet, and then still delicious. Because as you know, we're wired to like fat, sugar, and salt, and not so much antioxidants and fiber. So how can we get around this? And so I think that's particularly now that health continues to move up on the scale of key drivers of new products and what the industry is focused on. Doing some work along those lines in what I would call sensory nutrition is going to be critical, and it's going to work because we've already shown. We developed something that we call the flip strategy, where you cut down on something that's not very healthy, like saturated fat, sugar, or salt, and you replace it with something that's healthier and that brings flavor boosting properties so that the proposition is still palatable and exciting. The proof of concept work was replacing ground beef, so saturated fat, with mushrooms. And because the mushrooms brought umami properties, you could make blended burgers or lasagnas or so on that were just as delicious as the full meat recipe. Mm-hmm. We then developed salt flip, sugar flip, fat flips, where again we cut down on saturated fat, sugar, and salt, and then replace that with other principles. So all this to say that it can be done, and you can offer healthier alternatives for both people and planet if you apply yourself. So I think this sensory nutrition field is going to continue to expand, and it's a good thing. I brought up AI already multiple times, but again, that's going to be the other area where we're going to see it enhance some of the key things we're after, primarily designing new products that appeal to consumers and that also happen to be, nutritious, safe, and so on, and sustainable. So those are the two areas that I see as growing right now, or the ones that I would like to see grow right now. But I'm sure there are others.
Sure. Yeah, but those are like the important at this point, because we are caring more and more about the sustainability and the health of the people. So yes, I agree. And as you mentioned, all those changes, but without losing that I love expression from the good taste or good memories from the product, right? Okay. In your opinion, what would be the minimum skills or I don't know, habits that sensory science must have in order to work or start working with sensory? Can be methodologies or consumer skills or psychological skills. Let's say that we need a toolbox with
Yes.
with what we can do. Feel it.
We do. I think for people who want to enter the field, or I would have said until very recently sensometrics that you needed to have a solid foundation in statistics, univariate, multivariate, parametric, non-parametric, and so on. Now it's going to be at least some understanding, some fluency in the AI toolbox. What it means that instead of, or in addition to coding with R or with any of the other softwares that you might be used to working with, you're going to need some Python skills so that you will be able to participate in that process. So in addition to whatever skills you're going to get as a sensory scientist, I think you're going to need the piece to deal with the data. And if you're good at that, that's going to give you an edge, just like for the past 20 or 30 years, being a good sensometrician gave you an edge to, in addition to being a good sensory or consumer scientist.
Right. Okay.
The other piece that I would add, Ivan, is the ability to communicate the value of the work that you do. For people who are in sensory departments, consumer insights, and so on, one thing is to do your work and to do it well, but something that's very important as well is how well you communicate what you do and also the value of what you do. So, for example, we have this program, this distance learning certificate program, which is a year-long certificate program that we teach online with Becky Blybaum. And we've done that for 25 years now. We probably have close to 1,000 alumni, including some from Mexico.
Yeah.
The beauty of the program is that it's about a third international now. And when we teach in that certificate program, we also teach, besides all the principles, the methods. We want to share something with our students about how they're going to, boost their stock in the company, and that is about communicating the nature and the value of their work.
Okay, good. That's important for the people. And speaking about the Davis certificate, how is to live with that legacy? I mean, it's because you are involved in that, and I remember the first mail I received from Davis with your name that says, "We are now offering this certificate," and after having 1,000 people and more, hopefully. How do you feel about that? It's a good feeling? Is that like it's normal? In your opinion, is that important that people know?
It's a value that you put on.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's very important because what makes you enjoy your job besides research is the teaching and the mentoring of students. And I've been very fortunate that I've been teaching undergraduate students, graduate students, and also professional students. And those are three very different groups, different audiences. I will add also the study abroad piece. I used to manage the study abroad programs for the whole University of California. And so whenever you have a student study abroad, it changes their life. It has a huge impact. And so in terms of, teaching and mentoring, being able to do all four kinds of, to provide all four kinds of training has been really special. The other thing that's awesome about the certificate program is that we get to learn as much from the people on the program as they do from us, because they share their experiences, their challenges at work. They share with each other, and so sometimes we pick up, we get a good pulse on what's going on in the industry, and so I always learn something new from each class, and so that's a lot of fun.
Which one is more difficult to teach, the undergraduate, the graduate, or the professionals?
It's hard to say. I think they're all as easy or difficult to teach. I think the level of engagement is sometimes can be a bit lower with the undergrad, especially if you're in the spring quarter and they're about to graduate. They are not as motivated, but otherwise, I would say all are very exciting. The professionals who take the certificate program, obviously they are motivated. They really want to learn the material applied to their jobs. Often their companies are paying for their attending the program, but sometimes they are, and so they're really motivated. But I think in terms of the joy and the reward of teaching, it's the same across all four groups.
Right. This almost final question is from my students, because when we teach them the affective testing, every time we show them also this paper you have about sensory and consumer testing with children. And when I told them that I will interview, they asked me to say how easy is to work with kids in consumer testing.
Well, it's easier than you would think. When we try to do things like focus groups or actual paired preference or something, you'd be surprised at what age they can actually do it. But returning to the theme of the value of qualitative approaches, I think with kids, you also have a unique area there where you can get good information from observational methods. Also using the parent as a reader of the child behavior is a very powerful approach. So I would say you can do quite a bit with kids.
And it's fun, I guess.
It's fun, and I happen to become a grandfather again now.
Congrats.
With 2 very young children, and so I'm learning again to see how they grow and how they start eating different things and so on. And it's a lot of fun, because I have to tell you that the only slide that all my students remember after they graduate for many years is one slide where I show some very informal testing I did with my son when he was born, where I looked at facial expressions. I brought some solutions from the lab back home, and we took pictures of my, I think he was 4-month-old or something like that. And the facial expression when we gave him, salt, acid, something bitter, and so on. He eventually threw up, and so we had to stop the experiment. But that's the one slide that my students remember after they leave the program. So testing with kids is important, and it's fun.
Thank you. If you could describe your sensory journey with flavor or scent, what will it be?
Oh. It's a good question. It's a tough question. I think it's been a combination of the basic taste, really. Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. Some sweet, some sour, some umami, some bitter, some salty. Yeah.
Great. And let's say we have a time machine, and you can travel back at the time you were arriving at let's say, the room before your first sensory class starts, and you could tell something to your younger version. What will you say to that Jean-Xavier?
Well, I would say, really pay attention, and because nowadays students in the classroom might be engaged in many different activities, whereas when I first started in this, my first classes were with Rosemary Pangborn, with Mike O'Mahony, and with Anne Noble, and I became Anne Noble's TA. Among other things. So, you're talking about 3 really heavyweights, and I also had some with Ayn Rand and then with Howard Schutz. So, it was pretty exciting to listen to these people. So I would say, pay attention, leave your phone, leave your computer, and just enjoy the interaction, and yeah. That's what I would recommend to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining joining us today on this sensory talk. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I really enjoy it, and pretty sure that the people will be inspired and like this interview. Do you have something else to add into our conversation?
No, I would say thank you for having me. Thank you for doing that. There are some conversations about, we tend to look at the future, or, our students maybe think that the world started in 2000, and before that there was too much. And so paying attention to and respecting the work of the people who came before us, I think is always positive. It's something that we've been doing a bit more of at Davis recently, and so I think it's a healthy practice, and I'm really glad that you're doing these interviews and giving people access to different experiences, different viewpoints. I think it's great.
Thank you, and I really appreciate that coming from you, of course. And it is something I love to do. I love to meet people. And finally, after that first time I met you at Davis, when I carry a, um, a bottle of wine from Mexico to you, a red wine, if I remember well. So, and after all those years, knowing that you are still working with sensory, you are still doing very good job inspiring people. I'm really appreciate this time that you are sharing with us. Thank you so much.
Ha sido un placer.
Ah, muchas gracias. Bueno, nos vemos. Gracias, Jean-Xavier. A ustedes, muchas gracias por vernos. Si les gustó, denle like. Si no, simplemente no digan nada. Nos vemos en el siguiente capítulo de Diálogos Sensoriales. Hasta luego. Chao, chao.